I'd like to introduce you to a man named Herb Ruby, the man who I still, to this day, call Pastor Herb. Pastor Herb embodied the very characteristics of this tree right here. As a teaching pastor of over 30 years, seminary professor, father, husband, and brother, I had the privilege of witnessing Pastor Herb transforming the lives of so many, including mine. He is living a life that is productive, influential, purpose-driven, and identity-shaping. Somehow, he has seemed to find out how one becomes this tree right here. And he's living it. After seeing and experiencing the fruit of a life lived for Jesus in the way that I did under Pastor Herb, it set me on a quest to understand just how I could be like him. How do I become a disciple maker? I'd like to take you with me on a journey of what I discovered on how disciples are made through the privilege of observing the life of Herb Ruby. To start, I was in a place of uncertainty while I was at Covenant of Grace in Reisterstown, the church that Herb pours out his heart to pastor and guide, while still making sense of a lot of the questions that most disciples wrestle with, mainly hypocrisy, and how a good God could allow such evil in the world. The thing that was life-changing and cut through all of that noise about Herb was his character. There was hardly any noticeable discrepancy between the way he lived and the teachings of the scriptures that he loved so dearly. He had just such a clear affinity and connection with Jesus that was so deep. Oftentimes, he'd tear up during his messages, all because what he was teaching made him the man he was and is today. He led worship from time to time, playing guitar and singing songs of praise. And his entire schedule, from the moment he woke up to have his quiet time in the morning, to the moment he went to bed at night, was set in order to orient his heart towards connecting to Jesus and noticing the ways that he was moving. He knew where Jesus was. So I observed that. And because of that, I realized that if I wanted to be like Pastor Herb, if I wanted to be a disciple maker, I had to have a connection to Jesus. I can't overstate this enough. It's so important. I have to learn where Jesus is. Because Jesus himself said, if you don't remain in him and you, you can do nothing. Which made me realize the importance of the first step. I've got to find Jesus, and not just find him, but let him into my heart and have him transform me. We often say around here that Jesus is on the move, and I've got to show that I'm moving with him. That's why love God is the first and most important step on the mountain walk. I'm learning from Jesus. I'm learning to listen to his voice and do his will. I imitate what I see in him, and I am accepting his invitation and responding to his challenge. I've got to be the real deal and embody the truth of Jesus instead of reflecting contradictions that can cause many people to stumble, including myself. I have to truly invite Jesus into my heart for this to work. In other words, I can't make disciples if I'm not a disciple myself. So the question that I had to answer, and still do to this very day, and that I'm asking you all right here, right now, is do you know where Jesus is? If someone had an all-access, behind-the-scenes pass to your life, the way you live, the way that your calendar is ordered, the way that you interact with others, where your passions and desires are centered, would they see Jesus in that? Does Jesus know your flaws, your insecurities, your deepest wounds? Am I walking with Jesus? So while I myself was pondering those questions I just mentioned, here's another thing I noticed. After attending Covenant for a while and seeing that Herb knew where Jesus was, I began to position myself to get to know him. So at the end of the service, I'd find Herb by the door standing there shaking hands with his wife, Shelley. Like most teaching pastors do when they're finished at the pulpit. And we connected over football. He played in college, and so did I. He even had a brief camp stint in the NFL with Washington. As I mentioned before, Pastor Herb also sang and led worship, and he loved music that I called old and obscure. But to him, because he is old, it was just music, which I found fascinating. So we connected, and he took an interest in me. His wife, Shelley, led the church choir and invited me to participate. And while I was, based right alongside of Pastor Herb, we started to connect. And even though I was different, being a young black man raised by Jamaican immigrants, and him being an elderly white man born and raised in the States, he sought me out. It was a really powerful interaction, and it changed me. As someone who admired his connection to Jesus and was just completely in awe of his character, I was honored that he saw me. The power of those interactions made me realize that if I want to embody his same character, the way that this tree is set up, if I want to do that, then I have to learn where you are. I have to find you. I have to take time to find out what makes you the person that I am sharing time with. I have to know your story. It reminds me that I've got to invite others into my life and be invited into theirs. So while this journey can't go anywhere without this relationship, without this connection to Jesus, it doesn't end there, because it didn't end there for Jesus. Jesus lived as the perfect example of what it means for a human to love God and love others. And he was so passionate about it that he died for it. So don't rush past this and miss out on the fundamentals. What we're talking about here is a mission and a relationship motivated by love, which means that I don't see you as a prime target for a timeshare gospel, because I don't need to earn Jesus' approval. I already have it. And I don't need to win souls to grow, because just being with Jesus and cultivating my relationship with him causes me to grow. So rather than striving, we become a person of peace. Now, wait a minute, hold on. What does that mean? That's a very odd phrase. A person of peace is someone who graciously opens their door and with patience and grace becomes the safe, peaceful space where another person can grow, discover, and evolve, just like Jesus does for us. It's the kind of person Jesus tells his disciples to seek in Luke 10, when Jesus commissions them to spread the kingdom mission to the cities and towns that they came in contact with. When I become a person of peace, intimacy is fostered. Someone has opened themselves up and welcomed me into their world. I listen to their story. I learn who they are, what they value, what they fear, and what makes them strong and weak. I take interest in them. I love them as Christ does, without judgment or condemnation. Now, it's worth pausing to ask, do you have a person or people that you have fostered this sort of relationship with? And also, is Jesus your person of peace so that you can bring the same peace, warmth, and security to someone else? Am I listening to the Spirit's promptings on who I should reach out to, or am I letting my own preconceptions or biases cloud the Spirit's work? All right, let's continue on to the final step of the journey here. This is the part that I'll never forget, one of the most shaping moments of my life. So one Sunday, Herb was giving a message on this very topic here, discipleship. He was talking about how it requires the opening of the hearts of everyone in the church, including himself, to another person. Now, in a small church like Covenant, where you sit is like your mini small group each Sunday morning. Yes, you interact with others, but you sit in the same spot and talk to Miss Nancy about her cat, okay? So you kind of get my drift. Herb knew where I was sitting because of this, and he was giving his message. He was landing the plane at this point, and he began to say this. He said, in order to disciple, those that are older must open their hearts to someone that is younger and show them your life. Then he turned towards me and where I was sitting and looked me square in the eye, and he said something to the effect of, younger people, you have to humble yourself and allow an older member to point you towards Jesus through all that they've learned. That very night, we had choir rehearsal, and I said to her, hey, that was a really awesome message. I really appreciated you sharing that. And then he paused and he looked at me, and the same way he looked at me that morning, he said, good, because I was talking to you. That was the start of really intentional Wednesday afternoon meetings at 4 p.m., where through the relational equity we developed, he began to be more intentional about my walk with Jesus. He gave me books and asked me questions about what I read. He started teaching, correcting, and challenging me. And in that process, my faith and walk with Jesus deepened dramatically. I would later discover that most of the time he would just take some time out to prayerfully consider one person in the congregation to intentionally seek out and pour into in the very same ways he did with me. So what I learned is that while learning where Jesus is and where you are important, I have to point you to Jesus. To put it another way, not only do I have to live a life that points you to Jesus, but I also have to intentionally take steps and actions to seek you out and point you towards him. Now, this part is the most daunting because it seems risky. I could lose you if I decide to take this step. But here's the thing. If I don't take this step, I'm letting my fear and insecurity block what could be a life-changing shift for you. I'm blocking what the Spirit is prompting me to point you towards. And here's what is very important to note. Even though I have the ability to do steps 1 and 2, it is out of my power to open someone's eyes to the fact that I'm pointing or who I am pointing to. That's Jesus' power. That's in his realm, not mine. Therefore, I can be bold, knowing that he is the one whose hands it is ultimately in. And I couldn't think of a more sure pair of hands than his. So, pause. How does this practically look? How do we actually point others in this phase towards Jesus? So practically, here's a few ways that this looks. If you're in this phase, you can point them towards resources. Books basically function like the process that I've just drawn on this board here. Behind every page of a book is a person that has invested in you and has set aside time to have a few cups of coffee to break down and distill some wisdom that they like to share. When you participate in giving that to someone, you are pointing them to others who know where Jesus is and, to a certain extent, know where you are. Through plenty of research and interactions with people just like you and me, they have access to who you are. And because they're spending time with Jesus finding the ideas for this book, they have that relationship as well. One of the books Herb shared with me in this phase was Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life, a New York Times bestseller and a very prominent resource in this department. That could be a very good resource that I'd share with you. Another way is that I can ask you for prayer requests and set aside time to pray with you. Being consistent with that week after week is very important. That invites the Spirit into things. As I intercede on your behalf for you and for your needs, I am now connected with you in ways that allows me to see into what's happening in your everyday life. And I get to point you to Jesus. I can also invite you to attend conferences, services, concerts, or events, all in order to deepen your relationship with Jesus and have him transform you. And all of these and many other ways, I can intentionally point you towards Jesus. So, through observing Herb, I now know the ever-elusive how. That how, just to recap, means that I have to learn where Jesus is. And I have to learn where you are, and then I have to point you to Jesus. Those three simple yet deep and challenging steps are what I saw in Pastor Herb, and they changed my life. Pastor Herb, thank you for living in this way. Because of who you are and your impact on me, I am now in the same field, attempting to do the same thing with each student in Edgewood who is looking for someone to have the same influence that you had on me. So, if you get to watch this, Herb, thank you. And let this be a challenge to us as a church to embody these characteristics and have the same impact on our communities.